האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Miketz. Chanukah and the Parsha of Miketz always coincide. That's actually a principle that the Zera Shimshon discussed in Os Aleph, section 1 of his commentary on this week's Parsha. But we're going to take a look. We've previously done Os Aleph, so we're going to take a look at Os Beis, I should say, section 2. In a moment. And before we do, we're going to read a pasuk. This is not a pasuk from our parsha. This is a pasuk from, of all places, Sefer Mishlei, the last pasuk in Sefer Mishlei. And it is specifically Perek Lamed Aleph, pasuk Lamed Aleph in Sefer Mishlei, which is where Eshes Chayil, the beautiful poetry, the beautiful song that we sing, some people have accustomed to sing on Friday nights in honor of the women who work so hard to make every Shabbos beautiful. That's where it comes from Sefer Mishlei. So listen to this pasuk, it should sound very familiar. Tenu law mipri yadeha, give to her from the fruits of her hands, v'halaluha b'sha'arim ma'aseha, and her deeds will praise her in the gates. So the Zera Shimshon is going to analyze this pasuk and explain to us how it teaches us important things about the holiday of Chanukah and how it's connected to the holiday of Chanukah, which we began celebrating tonight. Okay, again, Zera Shimshon Parshas Miketz Os Beis, section 2. Here we go. Uve'inyan Isur Malacha, regarding the topic of forbidding work, shenohagos hanoshim b'Chanukah, that some women have a custom on Chanukah, meaning there are women who have a minhag, a custom not to do work during Chanukah, when that could mean just when the candles are burning, it could mean only certain times, certain days of Chanukah, we'll see in a moment. But in terms of that whole subject of women having a custom not to do work at certain points during the holiday of Chanukah, yesh lefaresh ha-pasuk, we should explain the pasuk of Tenu la mipri yadeha, the pasuk from Mishlei, which we just read, which is called "Give to her from the fruit of her hands." That's the pasuk that we just read. Because there are three questions the Zera Shimshon is going to ask on that pasuk. First question: Shahare priya deha, the fruit of a woman's hands, meaning the things that she creates on her own. Kfar heim shelah, they already belong to her. They belong to her automatically, so to speak. And so what does it mean when it says give her from the fruits of her hands? The things that she produces with her own hands already belong to her. That's question one. So why does the pasuk say give it to her? Ve'od, and another question, the second question, mahu mi priya deha, what exactly does it mean when it says from the fruits of her hands, the mashma, which implies miktzas mehem velo kulam, that we should give her only a part of the labor of her hands, the fruit of her hands, and not all of them, right? What does it mean? Mi priya deha, the Zera Shimshon says, from the fruit of her hands, but not all of the fruit of her hands, not all of the things that she produces. The ode and more. One more question. The third question: Lama dafka basha'orim yehalaluha. Why will her deeds only praise her specifically in the gates, velo bishar makomos, and not in other places? What does it mean that her deeds should praise her in the gates? The Zera Shimshon asks, won't her deeds praise her wherever she goes? So what is the specific connection to her deeds praising her in the gates? Those are the three questions that the Zera Shimshon poses on the pasuk at the very end of Sefer Mishlei, from the poetry and the song of Eshes Chayil. And the Zera Shimshon has already, we already know that there's going to be a connection to Chanukah from that pasuk. So let's continue. And not only Chanukah, but the specific idea of women not working during a part of Chanukah. besides what we've already written, the Zera Shimshon says in the beginning of Parshas Chayesara. In other words, put that aside. Oh, Yesh Lomar, we can also say, Shekvar Noda, that it is already known, Sheyesh Nohagos Shelo Lasos Malacha Kol Halayla, that some women have a custom not to do work during the whole night while the candles are burning. While the Chanukah candles are burning, it's known that some women have a custom not to do work during that time. V'yesh machmiros, and some women are stricter than this. Af b'yom rishon v'yom shmini, even not to work during the day on the first day of Chanukah and the eighth day of Chanukah. V'yesh machmiros yoser, and some women are even stricter than that, and that's a reference to women who have the minhag not to work at all during the full 8 days of Chanukah, night and day. So you have different customs. You have different customs regarding that women have taken upon themselves in different times, in different locations. But the common denominator, all of these customs, all of these minhagim have to do with women not working during a certain part of the holiday of Chanukah, or I should say during a certain time or times during the holiday of Chanukah. Upligi ha'achronim, and the achronim, the later authorities argue, im minhagan minhag. If if their custom not to work is a real minhag, meaning it's a bona fide, valid minhag that is binding, that actually prohibits women from working. If it's a custom that women have to follow and refrain from working during Chanukah, or at least during certain times of the holiday of Chanukah. V'im yesh lahakil lahen, or if we can be lenient with a woman, if a woman says, no, I don't want to have this restriction, I don't want to accept any restriction on my work during Chanukah, I want to be able to do work and to do whatever I would normally do. Just like men during Chanukah, there's no prohibition. There are no rules telling men they're not supposed to do work during any part of the holiday of Chanukah. So if a woman says that I want to be just like that, then yesh lahakil lahen, can we be lenient and say, okay, no problem? Or do we have to say, no, you must follow this minhag of having certain times during Chanukah when you don't work because it's a binding minhag? So this is a argument, as Zera Shimshon says, amongst the later halachic authorities. V'hoya tzad svara lomar. And it would seem that there is a possibility to think as follows, to say as follows. Shahabal, that a husband, im yirtze, if he wants, yochol lechupa la'asos malacha, he can say to his wife that she should work, even though they might be in a place where women don't work during Chanukah. You might think, the Zera Shimshon says, that a husband should be able to compel his wife and say, well, I'm not comfortable with you accepting that custom of not working during certain parts of Chanukah. Perhaps if the couple is in not a good financial situation and the husband says, we can't afford for you not to work, both of us need to work as much as we can, and so you shouldn't take off time during Chanukah not to work. Whatever the reason might be, the Zera Shimshon says we might think that there's a logical reason for the husband to be able to say that. Shahare, because behold, kishenosin lo mizonos mase yadeha shelo. When a husband supports his wife and gives her sustenance, in other words, let's say you have a case where we're dealing with a married woman, and let's say the married woman does not have her own income and doesn't bring into the marriage her own money to be able to support herself and buy food on a daily basis and pay for her the things that she needs in terms of foodstuffs and sustenance. So if that's the case, that she doesn't have those things and the husband supports her, then the work that she does, the profit of the work that she does goes to him. There's that financial arrangement. He supports her financially and takes care of her needs. And if she works, then the money that comes from the labor that she does goes to him. And then we would think that she's not going to be permitted to be strict on herself and not work during Chanukah kedei lahafsid labal, in order to then cause a loss to the husband. So the Zera Shimshon says it's very nice, hypothetically, theoretically, for a woman to say, I don't want to work, I want to be extra strict on myself and accept the custom not to work during parts of Chanukah, during certain times of Chanukah, for example, during the nights or during the days. The Zera Shimshon gave a few different possibilities. But the problem is that would be causing a financial loss to the husband, because he's the one who would get the benefit of her work, and he wouldn't be receiving if she stops working. Inami, alternatively, she'im tirtze lahachmir al atzma. Alternatively, you might say that the woman should be allowed, if she wants to, insist upon being strict and accepting this custom of not working during certain times during Chanukah. Okay, fine. So that she can do that. But then the husband shouldn't be obligated to pay for her needs during that time, to supply her with everything during that time. As it states in the Shulchan Aruch section of Even HaEzer, which deals, amongst other things, with husband and wife and marriage and issues that have to do with a marriage. And here's a quote: "Call isha shetimona milasos malacha." A married woman who refuses to do work, mimalocho shehi chayeves la'asosan, from the type of work that she's obligated to do, kofinosa la'asos, she can be compelled to do the work, ve'eno zona ad shetaseh, and the husband doesn't have to support her until she does the work that she's obligated to do. Ad kan lashono, until here is a quote from the Shulchan Aruch. So the Zera Shimshon has developed at some length the idea that it might make sense to suggest that if a woman wants to accept upon herself the custom of not working during Chanukah, that she would really have to talk this over with her husband, because he may need her, want her, feel it's important for her to work during that time, and may not want her to take off the time by accepting this custom of not working at certain times during the Chanukah. And the Zera Shimshon says it would seem that either the husband has a right to kind of intercede and say, no, you really need to work, or if you're going to not work, then I shouldn't have the obligation to support you in the same way I do during the rest of the year when you are working, when you are bringing in whatever it might be, to the family, to the income. So the Zera Shimshon said that's a possibility. Aval, but Hataz Orachayim, the Turei Zohav on Orachayim. Dima, he compares Din Chanukah ledin Rosh Chodesh. This great commentary, the Taz, compares the law of Chanukah to the law of Rosh Chodesh. Ubedin Rosh Chodesh kosav habach. And regarding the law of Rosh Chodesh, the Bayis Chodesh, a great commentary on the Torah, on the monumental halachic work called the Torah. So the Bach, which is a commentary on the Torah, and he himself is a great halachic authority, wrote, She'eno masuros b'melacha. Women are not forbidden to work on Rosh Chodesh, ela machmas minhag, except because of a custom that some women have not to work on Rosh Chodesh. But there's no halacha. Before the custom started, there was no halacha that required women, that forbade women from working on Rosh Chodesh. However, there's that custom that some women had. Aval ha'isur hu al ba'alehen. The Bayis Chodesh, the Bach says, the real prohibition is on the husbands. She'enam yicholin lachuf osan limalacha. Husbands are prohibited from forcing their wives to work on Rosh Chodesh if the wives have the custom, the minhag, of not working on Rosh Chodesh. So the Bach makes a very important and interesting comment here regarding Rosh Chodesh, and we'll see the connection to Chanukah in a moment, that if a woman has accepted the custom not to work on Rosh Chodesh, she can be allowed to follow that custom and not work. She needs to understand that it's not a halacha, but it's a custom that she's embraced not to work on Rosh Chodesh. But she should never think, oh, it's similar to Yontif or Shabbos, where there's a real Torah law and real rabbinic laws forbidding work. No, it's not like that at all. There's no Torah law forbidding work on Rosh Chodesh for anyone, and there's no rabbinic law forbidding work on Rosh Chodesh for anyone. However, if she embraces the minhag, the custom not to work on Rosh Chodesh, she can do that, and her husband is the one, the Bach says, who has to be careful not to try and tell her she has to work and she has to give up the custom, because he's not allowed to do that. Now let's continue and see the connection to Chanukah. Next paragraph. The imkain, this is the last paragraph in the second column. The imkain, and if so, who hadin af b'Chanukah? If so, then that should be the same law regarding Chanukah, because the Zera Shimshon just told us that the Taz, the great commentary, the Turei Zahav on Shulchan Aruch, compares Chanukah to Rosh Chodesh in this regard. So the same law should apply. That a husband cannot tell his wife she's not allowed, that she must work. Sorry, a married man cannot tell his wife that she must work during the holiday of Chanukah. He should not be allowed to do that. Just like the Bach said he can't do that on Rosh Chodesh. Umikol shkein l'sfaras habach, and how much more so according to the view expressed by the Bach, by the Bayis Chodesh, Gufei himself. She'ein lahakel lohen, we should not be lenient on women in terms of saying, okay, you're allowed to do work, mitam devarim hamutarim v'chule, based on the reasoning, which he only says the first two words of, and then he says, etc. But the quote is that if things are basically permitted, if something's basically permitted in halacha, but people develop a custom, a minhag, not to do it, to forbid themselves and make themselves, and they refrain from doing this thing that was essentially originally permitted, then we should not tell them that it's permitted to do it. We should encourage them to continue with their custom of forbidding this thing, even though it was originally permitted. That's based on a Gemara and Masechta Psachim, but the Zera Shimshon just mentions it to us kind of very succinctly. But the Bayis Chodesh brings that reasoning down and embraces it. So now we have a situation where the Zera Shimshon has developed the case rather strongly that a woman may choose to accept the minhag of not working at certain times during Chanukah, and a husband should not tell her to stop it. A husband should not tell her to give up the minhag and work during Chanukah, just like the husband should not tell her to work on Rosh Chodesh if she embraced the minhag to not work on Rosh Chodesh. That's where we are at this moment. And therefore, now the Zera Shimshon is going to circle back to the pasuk from Sefer Mishlei, from Eishes Chaya. And therefore, Amar HaKasav, the pasuk said, Tenu law mipri yadeha, give her from the fruits of her hand. We can interpret that to mean Tenu law mizonos, give her sustenance and support, af al pi she'ena osa malacha, even though she chooses not to work during certain times during the holiday of Chanukah. Lefi shema'aseha he mehalalim osa b'sha'arim, because her deeds praise her in the gates. And the Zera Shimshon says, what does it mean her deeds praise her in the gates? Dahainu ner Chanukah. This is a reference to lighting the Chanukah menorah. Shemitzvasa b'tefach hasamuch lapesach. It is a mitzvah, or at least it was in the time of the Gemara, to place your menorah, to place your Chanukiah within one tefach, within say 6 inches, half a foot, 4 to 6 inches from the opening of your doorway of your home. That's where the Chanukiah used to be placed, right outside of the doorway of your home, close to the doorway itself. And the Zera Shimshon says, what do we refer to that space right outside of our doorway? That's our gate. Those are the gates. And so women are praised in the gates, meaning they're praised for their commitment to celebrating the holiday of Chanukah. Ve'ikar hanes nase al yedei isha. And a main accomplishment of the holiday, of the miracle of what happened on Chanukah, the salvation of the Jewish people during Chanukah, happened because of a woman, happened through the agency of a woman. And we'll talk about that in a moment, what that means. And because we don't want husbands to be resentful about litein lo mizonos chinam, to continue giving this financial support to their wives during a time when the wife is choosing not to work. Mishum hachi amar mipri yadeha. That's why the pasuk said that the woman will benefit from the fruits of her hands, but not the total. She won't benefit from all of the labor she produces. And in the next paragraph, the Zera Shimshon is going to explain specifically what that means. But let's pause for a moment and go back and talk about the miracle of Chanukah happening through a woman. This is based on a Gemara in Masechta Megillah. The Zera Shimshon doesn't bring it here, but it's Maseches Megillah Daf Tes. And it states that the women are obligated to light the menorah, to light the Chanukah during the holiday. And even though you would be correct if you pointed out that it's a mitzvahs aseh shahazman grama, if you pointed out that it's a positive rabbinic mitzvah, which is time bound, because of course you can't light the Chanukah. The Chanukah, you can't light the candles of the menorah at any time. It's only during Chanukah, and it's only at night, and it's actually only a part of the night, really, that you're supposed to light the candle. So it certainly is a time-bound positive mitzvah. Nonetheless, the Gemara says women were very much included in the miracle, and not only that, they brought about the miracle. How did a woman bring about the miracle? So Rashi explains that the daughter of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, was bringing food to a general of the general commanding the Syrian Greek army that was oppressing the Jews at the time, and she specifically fed him lots of salty cheese and foods that would make him thirsty. And she did that with great wisdom, because once he was thirsty, she kept bringing him more salty foods and more salty cheese, and so he got more thirsty and more thirsty, until he demanded a wine to quench his thirst. And so she brought him wine, and he drank until the point that he was inebriated. And at that point, she was able to kill him. And when the soldiers saw that their commanding general had been murdered, then they ran away from the battle. And that was a major part of one of the victories that the Jews celebrated at that time. So now let's continue. We understand that let's actually just pause and recap for a moment. So the Zera Shimshon has shown us how the pasuk in Eshes Chayil, again, which comes from Mishlei, and specifically the last pasuk of Sefer Mishlei, which talks about giving the woman from the fruit of her hands and her deeds, praising her at the gates, is a reference to Chanukah, because the gate of your home is where you're supposed to put at different times, but some people go back, especially in Israel. It's very common to see the menorah, the Chanukah, placed there right outside of the doorway. And so that's a reference to praising women for their devotion to the holiday of Chanukah. And also when it says give her from the fruits of her hands, it means give her the ability to choose to keep the minhag of not working at certain times during Chanukah without her being worried about a loss of any kind of financial support. And now the Zera Shimshon will continue with the details of that idea. V'davka nokat mipri yadeha v'lo mimase yadeha. The pasuk specifically talked about from the fruit of her hands and not from the activity of her hands. Mishum de biksubis, because in the Gemara in Maseches Ksubis, Amrinon, we say, mahi osa. What mahi osa lo? What is a married woman obligated to do for the husband? What kind of work? So this is actually from a Mishnah over there, and it gives different examples. For example, Mishkal Chamesh Shloim Yehuda. If the couple lives in Yehuda, then something she would be obligated to do, one example would be to produce a weight of 5 sloim of thread. And that would be a type of work that she would do on a weekly basis. And it gives other examples. And the examples depend upon the location where they live and also the types of work that women were accustomed to do in these different locales. Ubi Gemara, and the Gemara there, Pligi Rabbi Akiva, V'chachamim Rabbi Akiva, and the Chachamim argue, Im dachaka atzma, what about a woman who presses herself? She really works hard. The asta yoser meharoi law, and she does more than what would normally be expected of her. Gaon, for example, she'asta arba malachos bevas achas. What if you have a woman who's able to do 4 different types of work at the same time? All you could expect of the woman is to do one type of work during one specific period of time. But this woman is particularly skilled and particularly assiduous, and she does 4 different types of work at the time when a normal person would only do one. Osha asta balayla bisha shederech b'nei adam lishon. Or she works during the night. She does additional work at night when everyone else has gone to sleep. So she's obviously really committed to doing as much work as she can. So what happens? Im zeh hamosar hu le'atzma o lebal. Does the extra work, the money that comes in from the extra work that she does, go to her, or does it go to the husband? You might say, we have a machlokas, an argument between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. So obviously one school of thought is, just like the other work she did goes to the benefit goes to the husband who's supporting her, so too the extra work goes to the profit from the extra work goes to the husband. And the other school of thought says, no, what goes to the husband is the normal amount of work that she does. But everything above and beyond that, all of this extra work that she's doing, she should be able to keep the profit. She should be able to keep the money that comes in from that extra work. V'gam haposkim cholkin bazeh. And also the later halachic authorities, not just in the Gemara, not just the Tanoim, Rabbi Akiva, and the Chachamim, but later halachic authorities argue about this question. V'ayin b'shulchan aruch Eben HaEzer, and you can see a discussion of this in the Shulchan Aruch section of Eben HaEzer, Beit Shmuel, in the commentary Beit Shmuel. You can see a discussion, and he gives you the place. Udekule alma miha. However, everyone agrees, mashe shayich law, that whatever amount of the profit she is allowed to keep, yilokech bahem karka, she can purchase a piece of land with that money, and the land will belong to her. So she can invest the money in land, and the land will belong to her. Vehabal ochel peros. And the husband would be able to eat the fruit of the trees that grow on the land. So there's kind of a partnership arrangement or a split of the money. She can buy a piece of land and own that piece of land for herself, but the Baal would be able to either eat the fruit or sell the fruit that grows on the land. So she owns kind of the principle, so to speak, and he owns the usufruct. He owns the fruit from the land. V'ayin sham, and look over there. V'hine zeh. Next paragraph, and this woman who's working very hard, lo nikra maseh yadeha. This extra work is not called the usual work of her hands. Shahari maseh, because when we use the word maseh, the activity, hu maseh oseh beteva kederach kol haaretz. That's a way of referring to the natural way of things that generally people do. So when we talk about a person's regular activity, we use the word maseh. But this extra work that she does because she's really pushing herself, zenikra kamo prichadash. This is like a new fruit. She's created a whole new thing on her own. She's used her creativity and she's used her ingenuity, an extra level of work that she's putting in to create something new, unexpected. It's not what one would expect her to do. Klomar, this means, umishum hachi, going back a line, I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Kemo prichodash, this extra work that she does is like a new fruit. Shehu migvuras hayadayim shelo, because it's coming specifically from the strength of her hand, shemotzios pri, and it's like she's bringing forth a new fruit. Umishum hachi, and because of this, Omar hakosav, that's what the pasuk is referring to when it says, to new law mipri yadeha, give her from the fruits of our hand. Klomar, this means to say, al yera be'ene habal, the husband should not at all be upset or be resentful. Litein law le'i eshes chayil mizonos, to support a woman of valor, a woman who works so hard, afal pisha ena osa malacha b'yomim ele, even though she's choosing not to work during the holiday of Chanukah. Lefisha tachas chiyuv zeh, because in the place of this obligation that the husband has to support his wife, yesh lo schus, he has the merit, he has the ability, the privilege, lishlot b'pri yadeha, to take control of the fruit of that she produced, also al yedei hadachak, that she made through her extra labor, meaning, as we said, that whatever the woman gets to keep from her extra labor, and there are different opinions and arguments about that, but she could buy a piece of land, and then the fruit of that land would belong to the husband. So the husband's going to benefit from the extra work that she did. V'od yesh remez. So now let's pause for a moment. At this point, the Zera Shimshon has explained everything he needed to explain to understand, to teach us how the pasuk at the end of Sefer Mishlei, the pasuk from Eshes Chayil, is related to Chanukah, and how it's praising women who are specifically connected and devoted to the holiday of Chanukah. And that's what it means to praise them in the gates. And also it's explaining, the pasuk is also referring in a way that's very technical, in a way that's hard for regular people like you and me to see. But the pasuk is also referencing this idea of the husband and wife, and a husband allowing his wife to take off work and not work during certain times during Chanukah, and also the benefits that he would get for allowing her to do that and not interfering. But now the Zera Shimshon is going to come in with a new way of showing the connection to Chanukah from the pasuk. V'od yesh remez b'pasuk zeh, and there's another hint in this pasuk, be'inyan shel Chanukah, that it's talking about the subject of Chanukah. Shahare Rashe Tevos Shel, because the first letters of each word from the beginning of this pasuk, to new law mipri yadeha, hu talmai. The first letters of each of those first four words are Taf, Lamed, Mem, Yud. Talmai is not just a coincidental group of letters. Talmai is the Hebrew word for Ptolemy, the Greek ruler over Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great, Alexander of Macedon. And this Talmai, or his son, played a very important role in Jewish history, as we'll see in a moment. Usechilas tigbores klipas hayevonim, and the beginning of the growth of the impure strength of the Egyptians, of the Greeks, the beginning of the impure, of the ascendancy and the power of the impure strength of the Greeks, Haya was kishehe'etiku haTorah lelashon Yevonim. It's when they copied the Torah into the Greek language, and this is what Ptolemy, or Talmai in Hebrew. This is what he brought about. He commanded the Jewish sages, 70 or 72 of them, to each independently write a translation of the Torah from its own language, from its Lashon HaKodesh, into Greek. We refer to this as the Septuagint. Kemosha Amru, as they say in the Gemara, Sha'az ha'yechoshech ba'olam, that then darkness came to the world, Shlosha Yomim, for 3 days. This was a terrible event, and it was the beginning, the Zera Shimshon says, of the rise of the impure Greek power, because they received the Torah translated into their language. Umisham, and from there, top to the top of the next column in the end of this last end of the piece, Nisametz koach tumas hayevonim. From there, the impure power of the Greeks grew and grew, ad shebou v'nei Chashmonai v'nitzchum, until finally the Chashmonaim were able to come and defeat them. Ukemoshe kosav hatzemach David, as the Sefer Tzemach David says, writes, she'el Lazar that Elazar, who we know as Elazar the Maccabee, shehumas al yedei Antiochus ben Shimshon, who was 90 years old when he was put to death by Antiochus, ben Shana, he was 20 years old, meaning 70 years before, Kishe'etiku haTorah letalmai, when the Jewish leaders and scholars were forced to translate the Torah for Talmai. So the Zera Shimshon says, in case you're a little skeptical about how this pasuk at the end of Sefer Mishlei, and also from the Eishes Chayil, how it has anything to do with Chanukah, if you're not sure, you accept, Zera Shimshon says, everything I've said until now to make the connections of Chanukah, just take a look at the first few words of the pasuk, Tenu la mipri yadeha, give her from the fruit of her hands, and you'll see the tough Lamed Mem Yud hinting to you that this is about Talmai. And why is he so important? Because he compelled the Jews to translate the Torah into Greek, and the Zera Shimshon says that was the beginning of the Greek power and why the Greeks had the power to come in and originally conquer the Jewish people, but ultimately they fell to the power of the Hashmonaim. Yasher Koch to everyone who joined in the learning tonight, and we look forward to learning again on the Parsha next week.